Okay, today we are going to go through some Mongo shell commands with our issue tracker and go through a lot of these queries that were, just getting us in the practice of writing slightly more intermediate queries from beginner to intermediate, I would say. So we went ahead and created an ERD that gave us a general guideline to start from with how our collections would be related and the information they would store. And so we have this ERD to kind of reference to help us write these queries. This is our plan. And then the assignment was to create an index for each collection and insert 2 documents into each collection. And the keyword's there, at least. And so many people inserted more than 2 documents, although not a requirement, inside of a file called schema.txt. And so I've got Mongo Compass open, and I've got the shell, command line shell, kind of opened up down here. And I do see a new version. I'll say ask me later. And I should be able to use my issue tracker. And this is a starting point to bring this over. So again, the first requirement is 1 index for each collection. And here's the command to create an index. Now this is a compound index, right? Key takeaways around an index: it allows you to perform reads faster, okay, but new records and editing records and deleting records, the other 3 operations are potentially slower. Okay, so if you create an index, you kind of get pros and cons. And so this creates our index called the default name, email_1, password 1. And again, the second one, Connor chose to go ahead and do both title and classification. Yep.
Actually, when I was looking into this morning, I figured classification by itself should be good enough.
Classification by itself. So if we kind of make it a more standard index, hey, we're just going to read a bug by maybe a classification, look up a bug by classification, show me all the bugs classified as unclassified, for example.
I'll have to go back in online to
Yeah,
do that.
yeah. And so now we've created 2 indexes. The next command was to insert at least 2 users. So here we've got an insert many, and you could kind of see that the first user has some various roles, a full name, a given name, and a family name. Here comes our second user, email address, password, roles, full name, given name. Okay, so we get acknowledged of true. We got 2 object IDs. Now, where this comes into play, my object IDs might not match his object IDs. So how could you do this differently? You could modify that command so that the users have the same object IDs every time. And so if I were to do that, I would come back into here. Here's one thing that's a little bit different. You can do an _ID : object ID, and then paste in a string, and then now this user has the same object ID every time.
Okay, so you did do that on these other.
Yeah, so I might do this so that my queries match his queries, right? So would you ping me the 2 user IDs and the 2 bug IDs of the users and bugs?
Yeah.
That way I will delete these records that I will delete this user records, documents, I should say. And this will allow me to have the same IDs as Connor.
You just want to DM to you?
Yeah, if you would just DM me, just
That's the first one.
the first user.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And that's the second user.
Okay, so I'm going to paste in his object IDs.
And these next two will be the bug IDs.
So this is something you guys should consider doing, in case you want to generate a user with the same ID every time, or a bug with the same ID.
One second, I need to.
And while you're doing that, I'm just going to go in here and kind of refresh my users. And I'm just going to kind of delete my users this way. Of course, I could do that on the command prompt, but it's just as easy to use the GUI. Okay, so now let me run my insert many on my users. And you could see now, MongoSH.
I'll send you.
Okay, so now the user IDs, the object IDs match. And I'll bring in that command here. And these are the object IDs for the bugs, right?
Yes.
So copy paste and scroll. Okay, probably your comments has an ID.
I didn't think that's.
I saw.
Those two that I sent are the comment ID and the test cases ID for the first bug. And that's all you'll need because there's no test cases or comment on the second bug.
Okay, I got to start to break this up because there's a lot going on here. All right, so here's our second one. There it is. So let's add the object ID here. Comma. And then the next object ID is for what?
The next object ID is for the comment object ID.
This one right here. Great. So here's the comment object ID.
And then the test cases.
This is the last one, which is the ID for the test case.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's hit that command. Quite a lot going on. Acknowledge true, 2 bugs with their object IDs. So we should hit our users. We've got our 2 users. We should hit our bugs. We've got our 2 bugs. Very good. Moving on to the next. List all of the bugs that you created. So this is going to be on queries.text. That your user created, and so he did, a find based on your user. You could just pick a user since he didn't create himself. He said where the author's full name, and again, kind of looking here, you can query by a bug author's full name. So selecting all the bugs with a bug author of their full name. Again, multiple ways to kind of solve for that, but that should return one of the 2 bugs. So here's the query, and here's the bug that it returns. So that would be number 1, list all of the bugs that you are assigned to. And so you can then hit the assigned to property, full name. Again, kind of looking here. Assign to full name. Which it looks like returns the 1 bug. So this user is assigned to that 1 bug. So far, so good. List all of the bugs that you created or are assigned to. And so you're just combining those 2 queries with an OR operator. And that should return presumably both those bugs, which it does. List all of the bugs that are unclassified. So we had a classification category, if you will, or property. So DB bug find classification of unclassified. We have 1 bug that is unclassified. List all of the bugs that have been approved by a business analyst, but are not closed. And so that business analyst trips some people up. But basically, classification of approved and closed is false. And so this is your implied and when you just separate it with a comma. So this is finding both classification approved and closed is false. And that would give us just the 1 bug where the classification is approved and the closed is false. List all the bugs that are fixed but not closed. And so this is another and. DB bug find test cases passed are true. So we're making sure that all the test cases are passed. Now later on, I believe we added to the UML a fixed property, and this is Connor's solution. He added a fixed property, fixed by, fixed on version, and fixed on date. And that's one potential solution there.
I
And so he didn't come back and modify this. The way that he was testing for fixed is if all the test cases have passed. That would mean at that point, that was what our UML looked like, right? We went on and changed that later on. But to kind of look at that, classification of true and closed is false. Classification is true. Oh, I'm sorry. I think we might have refactored this, right? Or is this the case that none of them have all the test cases passed of true and closed of false?
In the bugs themselves?
Yeah.
No, I had, let's see, my first bug pass was true, but closed was false.
Your first bug, so let's closed was false and test case passed in this case was false, but if we modify it, passed is true. Let's update that document. So you wanted this one to be passed as true, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's update that document. We'll just update it that way.
I might have
You probably updated it.
Yeah, I think
Now it returns that result because it's matching the
I
query.
think something changed in like a future.
Yep. List all the bugs that do not have steps to reproduce. And so he just found a $ exists. Said, hey, that steps to reproduce exist of false. And so this bug does not have steps. Looks like both his bugs should have steps to reproduce. If we look at that, steps to reproduce here is on our first bug, and steps to reproduce here on a second bug. So that's returning nothing because there's no data that matches that.
That's another one that was
Modified, yeah. Yep. List all the bugs that do not have test cases. And so this one has test cases, this one does not. Our second bug does not have test cases. And so we return that second bug, so that query is working. List all the bugs that do not have hours recorded. And so here, he did or, so here he's looking at the time log and seeing if it doesn't exist, or if the time log is empty, right? So if the property doesn't exist or it's an empty array. And so that's, again, that second bug is being returned, which looks good to me. List all the bugs with a number of comments for each bug. Now, again, when you're doing a sum, right, that's one like flag in my brain. When you're doing sum and average and these kinds of calculations on a field, where you're going to have to do aggregation pipeline. So we're doing an aggregate pipeline, and when you're doing $project, that's the fields that you're working with. So you don't have to work with all the fields. In this case, you're just working with a subset of fields. And let's kind of list all the bugs with a number of comments for each bug. So let's just kind of hit this query and see what returns, and then we'll break it down. We'll see if we had to okay, so here we're returning a bug. Did we get the
Yeah, scroll down.
number of comments for each bug?
You scroll it down a little bit, you'll see.
Comments is 1. And here comments is 0. So ultimately, here's comments. And here we're getting the size of the comments if it exists, right? So $size is what's basically returning the count. And so Syntax for that, again, would have required a little bit of research, I'm sure, to come to that solution, but
The reason of the ID1 comment, like all those fields in one, is just so it knows what to return.
yeah, I mean, for example, if you take the title off, then it no longer displays the title in the result. Yeah, so that's what the project does. You're correct on that. Let's move on to the next one. List all the bugs with the total number of hours worked on each bug. Well, if you could solve the last one, it's very similar to this one. But instead of just doing a size, which does a count, you do the sum operation. So here, you're summing the time log hours worked. And here in this case, this one, you get 50 total hours worked summed of. Looks like they might have done the sum a couple of times. So those were definitely these aggregate pipelines. You can kind of see those are the more intermediate queries. Again, if you really want to conquer that, my suggestion on those aggregation pipelines is that MongoDB University, there's like a 30-minute course on aggregation pipelines that I would recommend going through. And list all the bugs with failing test cases. Seems like it got a little bit easier on this last one. Test cases passed to false. Well, in this case, doesn't look like we have any. Test cases passed is true. Let's flip that back to false. Update that. Run the query again. And we get our data back. Oh, this was just a single hours worked of 50, I see, in the time log. Okay, so that was the queries. I know that we went through that kind of quick. I don't know if any of this is helping any of you. The point is, if you got stuck on a query, this could help you get unstuck. That's why I wanted to run through this kind of quickly this morning. So let's close that, let's close that, let's close that. Last but not least, manipulating the database. So manipulate.txt was the last one.
I'll go through and send you the IDs again.
Okay, update one. Yeah, so I can actually see we're updating one bug. So I'm assuming that since that's the bug ID that you're updating, we are going to, right? So there's our bug update.
I believe further
And-
on in auth, if you scroll to the right on the number 2, you should see the user ID as well. There it is.
Okay. Good, good, good. So let's add that to our user underscore ID colon object ID. Okay, add a new developer. So the point of this is had a role of developer.
You can close the user ID, the object ID.
Good eye, thank you. So an array of role, which here is our, under our user, we have a role property, which is an array of string. Go back here, paste, inserted our user. So add a new bug to the database, but only include the minimum required fields. So here's a new bug. assign this bug to a quality analyst. So we're updating a bug. We're finding the bug by its ID, and we're setting the assign to a quality analyst. Of Gwenny. Where do you come up with your names?
Makaru.
Makaru. So we not only did we find a match, but we did successfully modify. So these numbers are good to pay attention to, right? We successfully matched and modified. Add a comment to that bug. So we're updating the bug by its ID. I don't know that I need the comment ID because I don't know that we ever update that comment ID, or do we?
No.
Okay. So here we're adding a comment to the bug. So matched 1, modified 1. Add a test case to that bug. Very similar. Setting the test case array. Match 1, modified 1. Add hours to the bug. So we're modifying the time log, which time log is a property with a user ID and hours worked. Very good. Mark the bug fixed by you in the version it was fixed in. So here's setting the fixed by user ID. So there's a fixed property which is an object, has a fixed by object ID, fixed on version. And last but not least, close that bug. And that's quite simple. Set the closed property to true. Okay, good deal. I recorded that. I'll throw that out there. If you're stuck, you can always hit that recording and see, you know, what can help you get unstuck, because I know I went through that fast. Other than that, today's a lab day, working on Lab 0303. Let me know if you have questions.